So, E.T. the Extraterrestrial is out in IMAX for the first time ever, in time for its 40th anniversary. It is hard to believe that E.T. is now 40 years old, one of Steven Spielberg's best films, and delivers a lighthearted but emotional story about a kid that finds an alien in his backyard, tries to help him phone home, and develops this really close bond in the process. The movie delivers every emotion in the book in such a tight-knit fashion that you really feel like you're on the journey with E.T. and Elliot throughout the entire movie, all of that coupled by an incredible score by John Williams, and some special effects that still hold up pretty well to this day. So when it was announced that E.T. was coming to IMAX for the first time ever, I definitely had to check it out, and this video is totally not me ripping off the Upside Down's 4DX reviews. Isn't that right, Dan?
I'm suing.
Okay. I of course have seen E.T. many times throughout my life, whether it be on VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray. I don't have the 4K, I'm gonna have to fix that at some point. Now, some skeptics out there may question, well, why would you go out to see a movie in the theater when you could just watch it at home for free? Well, number one, I have A-list, which means it was essentially free. Number two, there are just some movies that are meant to be seen on a big screen at least once in your life, and E.T. is absolutely one of those movies. Seeing it in IMAX where the screen just completely covers the entire wall, it lends itself to a brand new level of immersion that you just can't get at home, especially seeing iconic shots like E.T. and Elliot flying past the moon. But what really sells it is the sound system, hearing John Williams' iconic score just erupt in the theater. Oh, I got chills many times. Now, of course, it is only IMAX, the seats don't move or anything, unlike in 4DX, which of course Dan could tell you all about. Please don't hurt me. The picture looks absolutely fantastic on an IMAX screen. Part of that is definitely thanks to the movie being shot on film, which is why a lot of older films get modern transfers on 4K and such, just look a lot better in these more modern formats, as opposed to a lot of newer films that are primarily shot on digital. It gives you the ability to just soak in every single frame in a way you couldn't otherwise. One thing I noticed this time around was how Steven Spielberg just utilizes movement in virtually every single shot of the movie. Not just simple stuff like, characters walking in and out of frame and such, but just little things like a can rolling down some steps, or a chair being shoved against the wall by an extension cord just to create that little bit of tension. It's little things like that that just keep the frame interesting and keep your eyes just glued to the screen throughout the whole movie. But the question, I'm sure, is on everybody's minds, or at least it should be. Do the cops have radios or shotguns towards the end of the movie? It's the shotguns. Yes, fear not, this IMAX version is the original, unaltered cut of the movie from 1982. For those of you uninitiated, there was a 20th anniversary re-release back in 2002 where Steven Spielberg added in a few new deleted scenes, a couple of CGI enhancements, and a couple changes to dialogue. Nowadays, that version is only available on the DVD release from 2002 because a few years later, Steven Spielberg basically denounced that newer version, so every Blu-ray and 4K copy we have nowadays is the pure, unmessed with version, complete with shotguns and a couple mentions of terrorism. But just because it is the 40th anniversary and all, it would have been kinda cool to see the deleted scene where Harrison Ford plays Elliot's school principal, but that version only exists on the Laserdisc release, and it probably always will. This is a great time to be an E.T. fan because not only do you have a chance to go see the movie on the big screen again, but there's also a nice little merchandise push, with Funko Pops and the like. Plus, if you have the means to go check out the E.T. ride at Universal Orlando, do it. which I actually got to do back in January. It was super fun to check out, and fun fact, the only reason that ride is still at Universal Orlando is because Steven Spielberg threatened Universal to never make a movie with them again if they ever tore that ride down. The more you know. So if you want to experience E.T. theatrically, either for the first time ever or for the first time in a very long time, I definitely recommend you check it out in IMAX. And also, if you've never seen the movie, this is the perfect chance to finally check it out. Go, sit in the theater, be with the cool kids, and then after you watch the movie, pick up a 40th anniversary Funko Pop, or I don't know, go play one of the 20th anniversary video games for the PS1 or the Game Boy Color. Stay away from the Atari game though. Stay away.
Hey, yes, so I have some news about one of your loyal customers.
Dan, what are you doing?
Guess what? He snuck in Reese's Pieces.
Stop!
Outside food to an ET screening last night.
I'm warning you!
Yes, I can give you his full name and address. I can give you his social if you want.
I can't go back to jail! What else can be said about Steven Spielberg's Jaws that hasn't been said over and over for the past 47 years, but it is just a masterclass of blockbuster filmmaking before blockbuster filmmaking was truly a thing. It has this perfect blend of tension and suspense with blood and gore that doesn't ever really feel gratuitous, not to mention an incredible score by John Williams, as well as some revolutionary practical effects that made audiences afraid to go into the water, and was the first movie in history to make over $100 million at the box office. And much like Steven Spielberg's movie E.T., I of course have seen it many times in my life, but never got to see it on the big screen until about a day ago. And let me tell you, there was just something innately magical about getting to see this movie on an IMAX screen that of course covers the wall from top to bottom. Now of course there are going to be those skeptics out there that are going to be like, well, why would you pay money to see this movie when you could just watch it home for free? Well, first of all, how many times we gotta go through this, old man? And second of all, it's not just because it's a giant screen projecting the movie, there's also the crowd factor in there as well. Because of course there are plenty of movies, if not every movie in existence, that yeah, you can sit down in your living room, watch it, pause it, go to the bathroom, but there is just something very different about experiencing this movie in a theater, dimmed lights, uninterrupted, surrounded by people you don't know. Just to give you an example from my own experience seeing the movie last night, there were a group of teenagers, maybe like 3 or 4 behind me, their parents were there too, probably were, you know, they probably took the kids to see it for the first time or whatever, and you could definitely feel the anxiety these teens were having while watching this movie, especially because, you know, sometimes they kind of vocalize it, especially in those moments when people are like playing at the beach and you get those POV shots of the shark, you know, swimming through the water, and then cut to later on when Roy Scheider's Hooper investigates the one boat, and then the one deceased head floats into frame, and that great jump scare. They all screamed when that happened, but it's not just the shock and terror of the film that gets really enhanced by watching it with other people, it's also the more humorous elements of this movie. I never really appreciated how funny this movie actually is, because a lot of times the humor is very subtle or dry, especially coming out of Chief Brody. They're just there at the right times that don't break up the tension or the suspense, but they are just in those nice sweet spots where it's like, yeah, maybe we can just let loose a little bit right before things ramp up again. I think everybody laughed the hardest, myself included, in the scene where Brody, Hooper, and Quinn are on the Orca. They get all drunk and they start comparing their scars with each other. In a way, getting to see this movie in IMAX in the year 2022 was almost like watching it for the first time in the theater back in 1975, where people were so terrified they ran out of the theater screaming. Nobody did that here, unfortunately. Much like getting to see E.T. in IMAX with all this, you know, new detail and such, it really gives you the chance to appreciate the filmmaking that went into making Jaws, especially considering this is one of Steven Spielberg's first movies ever. His first feature film right before this one was Duel, about a killer truck, so of course, you know, making a movie about a killer shark wasn't too much of a leap, but, you know, there are so many classic Spielberg tropes that I think really were cemented with this movie, like so many long continuous takes. One that comes to mind immediately is the scene where the mayor drives onto the barge, then him and Brody have a conversation about closing the beach, and it's all just one continuous take as the barge goes from here to there, and somehow we made it this far without talking about the sound system, because of course we've got another iconic John Williams score with his classic Jaws theme that everybody knows regardless of whether or not they've seen the movie. Getting to hear that theme build up as the shark makes its first attack at the beginning of the movie was truly euphoric. Now, I'm sure a lot of you watching this video right now are probably curious as to whether or not this IMAX transfer of this movie makes a certain mechanical shark look a little fake. And to that I say, no. I know it's been kind of a running joke for the past 40 plus years that the shark looks fake in this movie, but honestly, I never really thought the shark looked all that fake. The only thing that kind of makes it seem a little not real are the very obvious hinges around its jaws, no pun intended, and also just the fact that the shark actually looks that good, considering it's really the first time since, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that someone attempted to create a giant animatronic sea creature like that. So really, it's just awe-inspiring to see this thing come to life on a giant screen. So overall, if you've seen Jaws before or you've never seen it at all, absolutely go check out this movie in IMAX. If you're seeing it for the first time, it's gonna be one hell of a way to experience everything surrounding this film, especially since the fact that it's been nearly 50 years and literally nobody has taken shark movies seriously since. I'll be completely honest when I say I was one of those people who had taken this movie for granted since its release. Back in 2009, this is what everybody was talking about. I remember going to the theater with my family to see the movie, and we all had to sit in the upper leftmost part of the theater because it was so packed. But it seems like we all just kind of moved on from this movie pretty quickly, and I think it's definitely worth a revisit. I mean, it didn't make nearly $3 billion for nothing, right? This movie is absolutely gorgeous. Whether you're talking about the bioluminescent plants at night or the amazing floating mountains of Pandora, the CGI is still absolutely breathtaking and holds up so well 13 years later. It's actually kind of crazy. Even without a giant theater screen like Sam Worthington's Jake Sully, you get more and more immersed into this fictional planet and its culture to the point that you don't want to leave once the credits roll. However, the story is nothing groundbreaking, and I can still barely name most of the characters in the movie. Jake Sully. Now you might be wondering, what is so darn special about this IMAX 3D re-release? Well, I'm glad I asked for you. Number one, you get a free poster when you go, which is pretty cool. It's very big and glossy, and I like free posters, what can I say? Number two, this is a brand new 4K transfer of the movie, lending itself to even more detail than we got back in 2009. However, most IMAX screens are only in a 2K resolution, so what's the point, you may ask? Which is a fair question, but here's an example. Do you remember the really cool Shout Factory Friday the 13th box set from about 2 years ago? Well, those are just Blu-rays, but they had brand new 4K transfers of those films, and they looked absolutely incredible. Same basic idea, just in a giant IMAX domain. And number three, you do get an exclusive sneak peek at Avatar: The Way of Water, but we'll get back to that later. This is the first 3D movie I've seen in a very long time. It makes sense why that format kinda died out a while back, because it just didn't seem like that many movies were actually taking advantage of the 3D format. In fact, most of them were just lazy post-conversions just to sell a couple more tickets. But Avatar, on the other hand, was literally designed to be seen in 3D, and it shows. Not only do you get to see it on a giant IMAX screen, which I have blushed about in previous videos, but the 3D adds a whole new level of immersion. I especially wanted to check it out after a lot of you guys commented on my Jaws IMAX video how the 3D was even better. Couldn't see the shark in 3D, so I'm gonna go see the Blue Man Group in 3D instead. Even before you get deep into the jungles of Pandora and stuff, it already feels like you're there from the very beginning. When Jake Sully wheels onto base and this giant truck passes by, I legit felt like I was standing right there next to him. Of course, it only gets better as the movie begins exploring other parts of Pandora and all the incredible sequences like the Banshee flight. The only thing that rivals this IMAX 3D experience right now are the Avatar rides at Animal Kingdom in Walt Disney World, which I did get to check out back in January, and those were absolutely incredible. Now, I've said it before that it's totally fine if you want to only check out this movie like in your living room on your 40-inch TV, because you can still enjoy the movie perfectly well, but seeing it the way it was meant to be seen is just something else. Director James Cameron began developing this movie back in 1994, and it only started getting off the ground in the mid-2000s because the technology had finally caught up to his vision for the movie, which is on full display in IMAX 3D to the point that when the credits roll, it feels like snap back to reality. Damn it! The only downside to checking out the movie in IMAX 3D is the fact that, well, I do wear glasses 100% of the time, and the IMAX 3D glasses they gave me didn't quite rest flush on top of my real glasses, so they kinda had to like sit kinda down at the bottom of my nose, so I kinda had to look up at a weird angle, but my seat was pretty well centered, so it wasn't a huge problem. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you do get a brand new sneak peek at The Way of Water at the end of the movie. It's a short clip featuring a brand new character interacting with this whale-type creature. Now, I've told you how well the CGI in this first movie holds up after seeing it on the big screen again, but going from that to this itty-bitty sneak peek of the sequel coming out this year, it's like, holy shit! It's no wonder it's taken 13 years for this second movie to get made, because this small scene right here has got arguably the most photorealistic CGI I've ever seen. The whole thing is completely CG, right down to the water itself. And for it to look that good and instantly surpass the amazing VFX of the first movie, come December, we are all in for one hell of a treat. So overall, regardless of whether or not you saw the movie in theaters back in 2009, or you saw it on like TV back like, a year or two ago, seeing this IMAX 3D re-release is absolutely worth the price of admission. It is incredibly immersive, it'll hopefully give you a newfound appreciation for the technology and the craft of this movie, and honestly, it just makes you want to go back to Pandora. Which is good, because we have a sequel coming out in 3 months, and then we're supposed to get at least 3 more after that, so there is plenty of Avatar to go around, so give it a shot. Now, I'm definitely going to sound like a broken record at this point because my thoughts are very much similar to everybody else's who's already seen this movie, in that Avatar: The Way of Water completely redefines what an immersive theatrical experience is. I've seen this movie twice already, and both times I just completely forgot that I was sitting in a movie theater watching a movie. That once again, by the time the credits rolled, I was like, snap back to reality! But how, damn it? Well, I'll tell you how. It's because the movie has some of the most incredible CGI I have ever seen in my entire life, completely blowing the first movie's CGI out of the water, no pun intended. Yeah, it's definitely no wonder why it took 13 years for an Avatar sequel to get made, just by even looking at the poster there, just analyzing every pore on Jake Sully's face, to the incredible water simulations. I just kept staring at the screen like, how is this even fake? And just like the first movie, the 3D is used perfectly to suck you into the world of Pandora, and you really get the feeling that most general audiences have totally forgotten what a 3D movie is like, because several audience members in my Thursday night showing were like grasping at the screen for the first like 5 to 10 minutes. Like, what do you mean it's not actually coming out of the screen? That's crazy talk. I think the 3D and the VFX work the absolute best when we're finally introduced to new parts of Pandora, when we go to the reef people, get into the tropical islands and the oceans of it all, because we've seen the forest side of Pandora in great detail from the first movie, so it feels kind of familiar, but once we get to the tropical side of things, that's when it really starts to shine. Story-wise, however, it's nothing groundbreaking. If you've ever seen a movie about a family moving to a new town and everybody doesn't really accept them at first, they gotta prove themselves, you're gonna find a lot of familiar story beats in this movie. I think the big takeaway is that this movie is incredibly dependent on you getting attached to these characters and this world, that you just want to be sucked right into it, which is why I think the first movie worked so incredibly well, not just from a visual standpoint, but because of the Na'vi culture and the environments of Pandora. You want to learn more, you want to be on this planet, and you don't want to leave. So I think the movie overall does that a lot better this time than the first one, because here at least you're more established with the world and the characters and the rules of this universe. So this time you just kind of get to be along for the ride and just take in the beauty of it all, which I think works very well. Plus also it's 3 hours and 10 minutes, which doesn't feel like 3 hours to be perfectly honest. And it's of course trying to set up more sequels, which we are probably going to be getting whether you like it or not. But for everybody else that's wondering, what about the 3D experience, more specifically the IMAX 3D experience? Well, for the 7% of you on this poll I posted, don't worry, I got you. Now, step one in discussing any movie released in IMAX is whether or not the movie was actually shot with IMAX cameras or not. And in the case of Avatar: The Way of Water, no. However, the movie was filmed with Sony's Cinealta cameras, which are on a very short list of cameras approved for IMAX screens. This is a relatively common occurrence considering that 70mm IMAX film cameras are extremely bulky, highly expensive, and are usually only reserved for the big boys like Christopher Nolan. And not to get too off topic, but the camera rigs they used to film this movie with the motion capture, the underwater motion capture, is absolutely insane. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend you check out this video by Frame Voyager up here. But not until this video is over, alright? I'll know if you leave. So the movie still does take full advantage of the IMAX screen, filling in every square inch of that screen. There are no varying aspect ratios going on in this movie. That, coupled with the 3D, just makes the IMAX screen feel more like a window into another world, which is kind of the point. Speaking of the 3D, the cameras were rigged with special stereoscopic 3D beams, which is just cool people talk for saying it was shot in 3D, hence it was actually designed to be seen in 3D, and it shows perfectly as the IMAX 3D gives natural depth to everything, like you were actually in the room with these characters. There were a couple of imperfections with the overall 3D, but it's just little stuff like text on the screen seeming a little double vision-esque here and there, but those are definitely not what you come to an IMAX 3D movie for. But one very important thing to keep in mind is that Avatar: The Way of Water was filmed with varying frame rates, as in some of the sequences were shot at 48 frames per second, while the rest of it was shot in a more traditional 24 frames per second. So certain sequences are going to look incredibly smooth, like a high-quality PS5 game, or like those TVs on display at Costco with the auto motion smoothing garbage turned on. The big downside to this is that, well, projectors are not going to switch between the 48 and the 24, so the 48 frame stuff is going to look incredibly smooth, while the 24 frames per second stuff is going to appear a little bit choppy. Now, I mention that because I think it is important. However, I don't think everybody is going to notice that. In fact, I've seen some people online saying, oh, I didn't even know there were varying frames. So it's going to depend on what format you see the movie in. Speaking of which, I saw this movie in both IMAX 3D last night and in Dolby 3D Tuesday night for a special advanced screening. Both experiences were fantastic, but there were a few notable differences in there, so for those of you that are curious, we'll be talking about that in a separate video. So overall, Avatar: The Way of Water fully delivers on what you'd expect. an incredibly immersive theatrical return to Pandora, elevating the insane technology from the first movie and proving once again that James Cameron is an unstoppable force of nature. If you're gonna see this movie, you definitely need to check it out in the theater at least once. Do yourself a favor, go check out the next showing. You won't regret it. My only thing though is I hope this doesn't reignite the trend of, oh, every movie's gotta be in 3D, because again, a lot of lazy conversions. But if you're gonna be like a crazy person like James Cameron and actually, you know, build special cameras to film them in, then go for it. Now, I've seen Titanic a handful of times in the past, but getting to see it this past weekend on the big screen really cemented my thoughts on it. The movie tells such a beautiful yet ultimately tragic love story about a guy who's this free spirit who can go wherever he wants to, with this woman from higher society who is just constantly shackled down by her family's expectations of her. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, of course, have amazing chemistry with each other. It's of course juxtaposed by one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, so of course the movie does become a disaster film for the last hour. But even when the ship starts to sink and crumble apart, floods, sparks everywhere, the movie doesn't for a second forget about the human element, to where it's just so damn visceral and heartbreaking seeing nearly 2,000 people die in such a horrible way. Also, Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On really doesn't help make it any less tragic. But what is so darn special about the IMAX 3D, I know you're asking? Well, hold your horses, I was getting there. So, what exactly is so darn special about this IMAX 3D re-release? Well, it features a brand new 4K transfer of the movie with a high frame rate, much like Avatar's re-release back in September. Now, this isn't the first time Titanic has been re-released and remastered for the big screen. The first time was back in 2012, where it was released in IMAX 3D with a brand new 4K transfer then. It was then remastered again in 2017, this time in Dolby Vision, and now this time in 2023, the movie was re-released with a brand new 4K 3D, high dynamic range, high frame rate transfer. Remember that now. Now, of course, I didn't experience the first two re-releases, but this new transfer makes the movie look amazing, adding so much crisp detail to nearly every frame. There are a couple moments here and there where faces can be a little soft and washed out, but compared to the 4K transfer of Terminator 2, this is nothing. Of course, the detail is on full display with a massive IMAX screen, which I've said before can really immerse you into the world of a movie. One thing to note though is that I saw this in a different IMAX theater than the one I normally go to, because it was the only IMAX screen in my area that was actually showing it in IMAX 3D, which I thought was kind of weird. In fact, I nearly had the entire theater to myself last night. It was just me and some random middle-aged dude in one of the lower rows. He didn't even offer to hold hands or nothing. I mention this because this IMAX screen was a little bit on the smaller side compared to my normal IMAX screen I go to, so it wasn't necessarily the quote-unquote true IMAX experience. That being said, the larger format still worked wonderfully, and like I mentioned earlier, the movie does have a higher frame rate this time around, which I don't think I really noticed all that much compared to, say, the varying frame rates of Avatar 2, where it's like it'd be really smooth, then jagged, then smooth, then jagged, so on and so forth. So hopefully it won't be distracting for other people. When it comes to the 3D, it does add a nice level of depth to each scene without it feeling gimmicky. Of course, going back to Avatar for a moment, the 3D doesn't like suck you into this brand new alien world that you want to go back to over and over again for $3+ billion worth of tickets, but it still works wonders, mainly in the beginning where the dive team is investigating the sunken ship, and of course towards the end of the movie when the ship starts to actually sink, which looked incredible. That's thanks to a great combination of practical sets, miniatures, and some CGI to tie it all together. One little side note though is that IMAX re-releases like this can also emphasize a few imperfections in the movie. With this one, there are a couple moments with some rather obvious CGI rope. Yeah, rope. But I mean, if that's my only real gripe with it, then, you know, I think you can kind of connect the dots here a little bit. And I guess there's one more thing we gotta address, you know, could Jack have survived if Rose just scooted over a little bit on that damn floating door? And I don't frickin' know. The IMAX 3D experience did not answer any of those questions or make it any clearer. Besides, I mean, like, there was that part when they first put Rose on the door and they had, like, trouble balancing it and getting her on the door, so maybe the two of them would have, like, made it sink and then they would have, like, you know, both died and stuff. I don't know, okay? Overall, Titanic still holds up as an incredible feat in cinema that if you haven't seen by now, what the heck, dude? If you have the means and maybe just a slightly bigger IMAX screen, then absolutely give it a shot. Is it worth it? I would say yes. Yes, it is. Iceberg and all. First things first, Dune Part 1 was shot on the Arri Alexa LF IMAX and the Arri Alexa Mini LF. Both cameras approved for the IMAX screen. I mean, IMAX is literally the name of one of those, so like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. So while this movie was of course not shot on traditional 70mm IMAX film, I think this movie is one of the best examples of digital IMAX out there. And I know there are quite a few IMAX purists out there who will reject any release like this that's not shot on film or projected in a true IMAX theater. Everyone of course has the right to their own opinion, but I think when you have a movie like Dune, where multiple sequences were shot with this format in mind, that doesn't just feel like they threw it into the IMAX theaters just because they could. Visually, this movie is simply breathtaking. I did manage to see Dune in IMAX back in 2021 when it was first released, but I really did not appreciate the craft of it back then. Cut to 2024, seeing it again in IMAX, and now I'm just all like, a lot of that comes from cinematographer Greg Fraser, who delivers an amazing looking film, just like with every movie he's attached to. Every single frame of Dune could be hung up on your wall with so much fine detail and atmosphere. This goes hand in hand with the amazing production design, whether you're talking about the different homeworlds for the Atreides and the Harkonnens, the incredible locations of Arrakis, the ornithopters, the giant spice freighter harvester doodads, and when the production design and the cinematography are so good, they can instill fear into the audience before any of the villains say any words, you know you've got something good. That is what happened to me whenever we cut back to the Harkonnens on their homeworld, sitting in their dark, moody chambers going, "We will destroy the Atreides. My sand, my worm, my Dune." So with all that in mind, why not see it on the biggest screen you can? Like I mentioned earlier, the movie was shot with IMAX in mind, which gives the world a much grander scale, either when you see these massive spice harvesters or viewing the planets from space. When you compare the amount of visual information you get from a standard, 2:3:9 widescreen format to IMAX, it's actually quite substantial. It's not just, oh, look, there's Paul Atreides' knees in that one shot. Definitely needed to see that. No, it's like, oh, everything is a lot bigger than I expected it to be. This is so f***ing cool. Getting to see this movie again in the format with my greater appreciation of IMAX itself, it really made me fall in love with the movie in a brand new way. It also greatly reminded me that this movie is very, very loud. The IMAX sound system is not f***ing around with this movie. From the moment the film begins, we're introduced to Arrakis and the Harkonnen. Hans Zimmer's incredible score just fires on all cylinders. Not quite enough to make you go deaf or get any tinnitus in your ears, but enough to make a standard theater screen or your home sound system just seem like a $20 Bluetooth speaker. Anytime in the movie where the track titled Paul's Dream came up and it goes, chills every time. And the IMAX aside, the movie as a whole is just simply spectacular. Even though it feels like it very much suffers from that Part 1 syndrome where we've got this crazy new world and we have so much we got to establish right at the get-go with the characters, the lore, the planets. I think it's still able to tell a compelling story, even though it is very much actively pushing us and saying, hey, guess what? We're gonna make a part 2, so don't worry, that's when the really good stuff's gonna happen. A lot of that is thanks to its absolutely stellar cast, including Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Jason Momoa, Stellan Skarsgård, Javier Bardem, etc., etc. And even though a few of these characters clearly just don't have much to do in this first part, like Dave Bautista as Glasso Raban, I know I got that totally wrong there, but these actors' overall enthusiasm for these characters and working with Denis Villeneuve, it just gets me excited to see what they're gonna do with part 2, because the whole cast and crew just gives the sense of, oh, we're just getting started, boys and girls. However, this IMAX re-release wasn't just simply throwing it back into the theater for one night. We also got an exclusive 10-minute look at Dune Part 2, which is due out on March 1st. It was only a few short minutes, but it really cranked my hype up to 11. Maybe even 12. You know, it starts off with your run-of-the-mill featurette with the cast and crew saying, oh yeah, we made a movie, and it's awesome. Then we get a scene of Timothy Chalamet's Paul Atreides riding a sandworm for the first time. From what I've heard, it's one of the most memorable parts of the book itself. I still need to read the book, but I don't want to do that until the movie comes out because I don't want it spoiled for me, you know what I mean? Not only does this one scene fill up the IMAX screen, but the entire movie is supposed to be shot completely in IMAX, so that's exciting enough alone. But then we get to the worm itself, which the VFX are mostly worm-induced sand debris flying around, but the sound design... I have never felt theater seats vibrate and shudder like this before. It literally felt like the worm was crawling under our seats, like some weird, twisted audience gift from the Oprah Winfrey Show or something. The tension, the score, the visuals just all culminate in a really satisfying payoff. Then we get a short trailer for part 2 showing moments yet to come, and good God, the audience went ballistic. Dune Part 2 is going to be one hell of a cinema experience. It's coming out in IMAX 70mm, which I have tickets to go see, so look out for that review in about a month or two. And honestly, I just can't wait for all of our worm and spice dreams to come true. Now, I've seen this movie a couple times so far, and I think that it is quite possibly Christopher Nolan's best movie to date. The way he takes the true story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project and tells it on such a grand scale that expertly blends drama, spectacle, and straight up horror elements at times just had me leaving the theater going, wow. Cillian Murphy delivers the best performance of his career, someone who Nolan has worked with many times in the past, including Scarecrow in the Dark Knight trilogy, but this is the first time that Cillian Murphy gets a leading role. The movie is a character study of the father of the atomic bomb, with Murphy front and center. The way he just tells a complete story with his eyes alone, whether he's lecturing at a university or just reflecting on the horrors of his creation, it was just fantastic. You can feel the toll the Manhattan Project took on him, especially afterwards when the US basically tried to discredit him. That's a real oversimplification of events, but this movie is 3 hours and there's a lot to unpack. But everybody in the cast is fantastic. So many recognizable faces, from Emily Blunt to Robert Downey Jr., Jack Quaid, to even Josh Peck. No matter how big or how small the roles were, everybody in this movie really got to shine and brought their A game, especially Robert Downey Jr. as Lewis Strauss, who, let's just say it's clear that Robert Downey Jr. really liked having some strong material to work with. Now, pretty much everything else I want to praise about this movie can wait a good, few more seconds. With everything I just briefly described to you, how does all of that translate into IMAX? The big square, the thing people keep coming back to this channel for because you like it when I talk about the movies on the big square. Alright, first things first. Christopher Nolan does not mess around when it comes to IMAX. Most of the movies we talk about on this channel are movies that were shot on digital cameras that were approved for the IMAX screen. There is none of that shit here. This movie was shot on genuine 70mm IMAX film cameras, including the IMAX Mark III and Mark IV. Now that's what I'm talking about! On a quick side note, I got to see this movie Tuesday night at an advanced screening where that was shown in 70mm. Not IMAX 70mm, but a standard size screen in 70mm, which that was a cool way to experience the movie for the first time, but let me tell you, that standard 70mm does not do the movie justice. When I saw the movie in IMAX last night, it was like watching it for the first time all over again. Of course, you get your scenes filmed in the 2:3:9 aspect ratio, but then a great majority of the movie opens up to 1:9:0, and if you are really lucky and you get to see it in IMAX 70mm, it'll even open up to 1:4:3. Oh, I could die happy now. The IMAX was used so damn beautifully, capturing not only the incredible establishing shots of Los Alamos and these great pieces of architecture, but just simple things like Oppenheimer walking down a hallway. It just brought this sense of gravitas to every frame with so much depth and detail. This is also the first time ever that black and white IMAX film has been used for a movie like this, and it was developed specifically for this movie. Now I'm sure everybody watching this video right now wants to know, what was it like in the Trinity test detonation when the atomic bomb went off, set a bunch of flames into the air? What was that moment like? It's the one thing that everybody's been hyping up for months, and it's like, oh, I cannot wait to see that specific part in IMAX. I want to feel the flames on my skin and walk out of the theater with radiation poisoning. And, simply put, have you ever just gone out at first light, looked upon a beautiful mountain range, took in the atmosphere and went, this is sublime. There you go. Nolan is famous for his strong use of practical effects and has bragged that Oppenheimer has no CGI shots whatsoever. Somehow they recreated the atomic blast without using an actual atomic bomb and killing the entire crew. And man, when this thing detonates, time just stands completely still. You get to soak in the beauty and the horror of this creation. There was not one single sound made in the theater. It was just a moment of collective awe and wonder. It's one of those rare movies that was shot specifically on IMAX film that just takes 110% advantage of the format. And that is without discussing the sound design whatsoever. I'm gonna be straight up with you. If this movie does not win the Oscar for Best Sound Design next year, then something is wrong. It was just used so effectively in moments beyond the blast itself. It really lends to the horror elements, like I mentioned before, where Oppenheimer starts having visions of the blast, where elements of the sound just cut out, isolating certain ones, followed by the boom of the explosion, really just puts you inside of his mind in those moments. It's all tied together by Ludwig Göransson's incredible score, which can go from triumphant to anxiety-inducing in a split second. Let's wrap this up, shall we? Overall, Oppenheimer is Chris Nolan at his absolute finest. He managed to take a very dialogue-heavy historical drama and turn it into a blockbuster spectacle that you need to check out on the biggest screen possible. Do I even need to answer the question whether or not you should check this out in IMAX? Well, I'm going to anyway. Yes, 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 1,000 times. Yes. And what I'm gonna say to you right now, I mean this completely as your friend. If you go and see this movie in the theater, but you do not see it in IMAX, you're a fool. I'm just kidding. Anywhere else I'd be a 10. Alright.
My disappointment is immeasurable. And my day is ruined.
Now, this was the third time I've seen Barbie in theaters, and of course I took part in the Barbenheimer craze back in July when everybody was wearing pink and or saturated 1940s colors in the theater and stuff. That was one electric weekend. But actually talking about the movie itself, it's a hilarious blend of satire and human emotion with one of the most star-studded casts we've gotten in a long time. Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling are perfectly cast as Barbie and Ken. Not only are they picture-perfect depictions of these dolls, but they also get to show off their comedic skill to great effect. Mainly Ken, though. He's definitely the highlight of the entire movie as he stumbles into the real world, learns about patriarchy and horses, and goes down, a bit of a villainous route for a while, but good God, Ryan Gosling just owns every second of the movie he's in. But what I really like about this movie, though, is how it makes fun of both men and women, as it shows just how honestly ridiculous it is, making things up like Barbie dolls and patriarchy just to simply cope with existing. The movie's themes of identity and having to unlearn what you think made you, well, you, I think is a really powerful idea, and that makes this movie more than just simply an IP plugging pro-Mattel cash grab. But with Greta Gerwig as director, I never really thought it would go down that route because I really love what she's done as a director so far. In fact, Lady Bird is one of my all-time favorite movies, just putting that out there. That said, there were moments where I felt like the message got a little bit diluted with just a little too much satire and playing too much the stereotypes, like the Barbies manipulating the Kens by feeding into their egos and stuff. It was those couple moments where I felt like they were giving off the wrong ideas there, but then Michael Cera did Kung Fu on a bunch of Kens, so the scales are pretty balanced there. With that out of the way, I know what you're all actually here to talk about. How did the movie Barbie look in IMAX? The big square. It's why you clicked on this, I know. So let's just start talking about the IMAX, shall we? First things first, Barbie was shot on the Arri Alexa 65, which is a camera approved for the IMAX screen. And to go along with that perfectly, the entire movie fills up the entire screen with a 2:0:0 to 1 aspect ratio. Not 1:90, but 2:0:0, which makes the entirety of Barbie in IMAX. Woo! Right off the bat, the movie opening with its parody of 2001 with the little girls discovering the giant Barbie doll just proves that this movie deserved the IMAX treatment all along. The cinematography and the sound design in that one scene just really sucks you right into the movie immediately, which is what a good IMAX experience needs to do. As great as the Barbenheimer weekend was, having these two very different movies come out back to back like that, it's kind of a shame they couldn't share the IMAX screen so you could experience both great movies in these major formats. Because I saw Barbie 2 other times on a standard theater screen, and while yeah, it worked, it just really didn't do this movie justice. I really got to soak in the amazing production design of Barbie Land. The vibrant pink colors and intentionally fake plastic looked fantastic on the big square. In fact, the colors look so good in the scene where Barbie and Ken go from Barbie Land right into the real world and the color just gets so muted. It was like, ah, my eyes! But the best moment in IMAX and just my favorite part of the movie in general was I'm Just Ken, where Ryan Gosling just breaks into song and dance as the Kens go to war with each other. Not only was that scene just a perfect culmination of humor and stylish scale, but I just had the urge to get up and start singing along. I didn't though, because that would have been bad theater etiquette. Alongside the IMAX release, you get an extra few minutes of footage after the credits, and in all honesty, it's just a basic blooper reel with a couple of extended and alternate takes here and there. Nothing really special, but it's like a nice little extra sprinkling on top. So, it's like, it's not a big deal. Overall, Barbie just gets better and better with each viewing. One might even say this movie is enough. As for the IMAX experience, I'm gonna say that yes, absolutely, this movie proved itself necessary of the big square within just a few seconds, and again, I'm really glad we finally get to see this movie in IMAX after a couple months of release. And this is one of the most beautifully shot and emotionally gripping sci-fi movies we've gotten in a little while. The movie takes a lot of familiar elements from other stories. It's basically like if you took Star Wars, The Last of Us, with a little bit of Terminator and a sprinkle of Blade Runner, put that all into a blender, stirred it all up, and there you go. you get the creator. That's to say the story and plot are nothing we really haven't seen before, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as you can package it in an interesting way, which I think the creator definitely does. It takes the very relevant topic of AI and its dangers in the modern world and mixes them with post-Vietnam War themes about the horrors of guerrilla warfare, which of course George Lucas did for Star Wars back in the late 70s, which gives it a classic cinema feel but still makes it contemporary. Some people have said they don't buy John David Washington in the lead role, which I totally disagree with. If you liked him in Tenet, you're gonna like him in this movie. His Joel and Ellie style relationship with the AI known as Alfie is the centerpiece of the entire movie, and it leads to an onslaught of emotions as the second and third act ramp up. It's really hard to keep a dry eye at that point. As for the remainder of my talking points, that can wait for just 1 second while we get into the next part of the review, which is the IMAX, as in how does the creator look in IMAX on the big square? Well, let's start talking about that next, shall we? Interestingly, the creator was not shot on your traditional cinema cameras. It was filmed on the Sony FX3, which is a prosumer camera that runs for about $4,000 that you yourself could run to Best Buy right now and pick up if you wanted to, which luckily has been IMAX certified for this movie. That was one thing that got me really excited about seeing this movie. Director Gareth Edwards wanted to prove you can make a large-scale sci-fi epic without a $300 million budget. The budget for this one coming in at just shy of $90 million. Really high-quality filmmaking gear is becoming more and more accessible all the time, and I think that's really inspiring when a major high-concept sci-fi movie like this that gets a major IMAX release can be shot using a, $3,000, $4,000 camera that you and I could own right now. The lenses, however, they used for it, let's just say there's a reason most filmmakers rent their lenses. The movie was also shot in a 2:76:1 aspect ratio, not quite the 1:90 we usually associate with IMAX releases, which tend to fill up the entire screen. For this movie, they opted to use a 70mm ultra-wide presentation, which classic movies like Ben-Hur and even more recent things like The Hateful Eight have done masterfully in the past. This movie's strong visual presence was meant for the IMAX screen. You really get to appreciate the ultra-wide frame, whether it's the sweeping landscapes of New Asia or shots of the giant Nomad space station that just blows stuff up a la the Death Star. By the way, any fans of Rogue One out there, you're gonna be really pleased by this movie because Gareth Edwards directed Rogue One and this one, and he definitely transplanted a lot of Rogue One's DNA into this movie. That's all I'll say about that. This includes Greg Fraser's incredible cinematography. You know that handful of movies from the last couple of years where you're like, damn, this movie looks absolutely incredible? You could thank Greg Fraser for that. Overall, the creator should satisfy your needs for an original sci-fi movie. It was a really great time at the theater, but one quick side note though, if you're one of those people that goes onto Twitter and is like, oh, people don't support original movies anymore, and you yourself don't go out and support said original movie when it comes out, stop talking, alright? You don't get an opinion no more. As for the IMAX, I'm going to say that yes, absolutely, you should check this out in IMAX if you get the chance to. With its ultra-wide presentation, seeing this in a standard screen or even at home in a couple of months, it just won't be the most ideal way to check it out. Again, we can't all do that. We don't have IMAX theaters or whatever nearby, but if you do have the means, I highly recommend it. And yeah, can we just talk about how satisfying it is this movie's finally coming out, because this movie started filming in 2020 and of course got delayed due to COVID. And yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, we're finally caught up on movies that were supposed to come out between 2020 and 2021. I could be wrong, but it feels good, you know, it feels really good. But beyond that, no spoilers in this video, but let's start talking about the movie. And simply put, you do get what you expect from the newer Mission Impossible movies, some really impressive practical effects, some insane stunt work, and an opening title sequence that makes you want to get up and just Tom Cruise run down the street until you get hit by a bus or something. How director Christopher McQuarrie keeps making these top-notch action movies, I'll never know. This time around, Ethan Hunt and company are dealing with a key to basically this really powerful AI which can predict the future and control governments, something that's very much a point of contention right now, so you know, it's a very timely situation for these characters to be in. And while we don't get the full extent of what this AI can do necessarily, it adds a whole new level of deception where it's like, oh, I really don't know who I can trust this time around. Everybody back from the previous movies are once again great, including Tom Cruise being an absolute mad lad, and Rebecca Ferguson just being a complete badass. And we do have some new welcome additions, including Haley Atwell, who plays a jewel thief who gets roped up into Ethan Hunt's crew and has to help save the world. You know how that goes. As well as Palm Klimentov, whose actions definitely speak louder than words. Literally, she has like very minimal dialogue, but she kicks a lot of ass in this movie. It's really cool. Both of them are clearly being set up for bigger things in part 2, so I can't wait to see what they do there. Now, the big thing most people come to these Mission Impossible movies for are the really impressive stunts. There's always that one really impressive stunt that they highlight more than anything in the marketing, whether it be Tom Cruise hanging off the side of a plane midair, or that really impressive one-shot base jumping sequence from Fallout. This time we get Tom Cruise riding a motorcycle off a cliff and parachuting onto a train, which, yeah, is super cool, but I feel like it's not as insane as things we've gotten before. And that's kind of my main issue with this particular movie, is it feels like it doesn't ever really top Mission Impossible Fallout, which I'm not necessarily faulting them for, because Mission Impossible Fallout is just a masterclass of action filmmaking, and yeah, I wouldn't want to have to try to beat that movie either. Long story short, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 still delivers on what you want from a Mission Impossible movie, and I've pretty much learned since Top Gun Maverick came out last year to just never question Tom Cruise. Ever. But how was Tom Cruise's latest act of cinematic mad laddery on the big square? Well, let's talk about that next, shall we? On the technical side, the movie was shot partially on the Sony Cinealta Venice, the same camera used in Top Gun Maverick, designed specifically for the IMAX screen, so there's that. Now, I was really hyped to see this movie in IMAX because I had never seen a Mission Impossible movie in IMAX before, so I was like, alright, cool, this is gonna be an awesome experience, it's gonna blow off my sock holes. So about that, unfortunately the movie maintains a 2:3:9 aspect ratio throughout the entire runtime, never once expanding to the full 190. That is disappointing. I've talked before how I can forgive that for IMAX releases like John Wick and Spider-Verse and things like that, but here it just left me confused. Why wouldn't you take full advantage of the IMAX frame? It did wonders for Top Gun Maverick last summer, and then I thought to myself, okay, this is not really based on my experience with the franchise in the past, so maybe they just never did that for these movies. But then a little bit of research showed that for Mission Impossible Fallout and Ghost Protocol that, yeah, there were moments where they did open up to the full IMAX frame for the action sequences you would expect them to. I don't know why they didn't do that for this movie, especially for the one big action scene of Tom Cruise going off the cliff and all that. It just feels like a real missed opportunity. Now, that's not to say that completely ruins the IMAX experience or anything like that, because it's still a massive screen with a really high quality projector, so it still gives you a chance to just soak in all the cool chases and stunt work, like the finale on the train that goes straight into a cliff, a la Back to the Future 3, which was done practically, by the way, and that is super cool. Sound-wise, the IMAX almost always delivers, and I think one of the strongest elements in this movie are a handful of sequences where there's no music whatsoever, it's all in the sound effects and the dialogue. A movie that knows when to drop the music for a more effective moment is A-okay in my book. Overall, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 doesn't necessarily top Mission Impossible Fallout, but that doesn't change the fact this is still a masterfully created movie that just feels like summer blockbuster fine dining, and I can't wait to see what they do with Part 2. As for the IMAX, I would say that, yeah, I think it's still certainly worth checking out on the big square. I just feel like it doesn't take advantage of the format like other Mission Impossible movies have done before. And if you've seen the channel for a little while now, you probably know I'm a pretty big fan of the Rocky franchise, just the Creed movies in general. Rocky, of course, is an all-time classic movie series, and I think the Creed films themselves are just a prime example of how to do a legacy reboot, whatever you want to call it, while still maintaining what made the originals so great. While this movie doesn't do anything revolutionary with the Rocky formula, every element of Creed 3 shines so bright. Michael B. Jordan and Tessa Thompson once again still bring their A-game to these roles, but of course this time we do get Jonathan Majors as Damien, who just totally steals the show, much like how Jonathan Majors stole the show in Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania. The Creedification of the MCU is upon us! He gets another chance to bring his ferocity but overall tenderness center stage as he plays this character deeply rooted in Adonis's past. Their relationship is the center of the entire movie, and if that part didn't work, then the entire premise would have completely fallen apart. But luckily, it works wonderfully. This is also Michael B. Jordan's directorial debut, in which he does a phenomenal job, but we'll talk more about that once we get to the IMAX stuff. But on just one quick side note, I don't think this is really a spoiler, but Sylvester Stallone's Rocky is not in this movie whatsoever, and I think for the most part the movie does totally fine without him, but there is one scene in particular where Rocky's absence feels just weirdly out of place and is just, it kind of takes away from that moment a little bit. Again, no spoilers, that's all I'm gonna say. Movie still delivers by quite a lot. But if you guys do see the movie, come back and comment down below your experience checking out Creed 3, whether you liked it, disliked it. Did you see it in IMAX, or maybe you're waiting for me to talk about the IMAX, then you can make your decision based on that? That would kind of make sense. That's kind of why you clicked on this video, I'm sure. So anyway, let's start talking about the IMAX, shall we? But this is the first ever sports movie to be filmed for IMAX screen specifically, with different sequences filmed on the Sony Cinealta. The IMAX sequences are obviously limited to the fights themselves, which there are quite a few throughout the movie, which of course are all shot beautifully by Kramer Morgenthau and directed by Michael B. Jordan. And what I really liked about Michael B. Jordan's directing style in this movie is that it is very on brand with the other Creed movies from a visual and auditory standpoint, but he makes this movie his own and brings his own vision into it, especially with the fight sequences, which are some of the most uniquely executed and wonderfully stylized in the entire franchise. The way it keeps Adonis and Damien front and center in the final fight, I thought, whoa. Now that is absolutely incredible without feeling too style over substance. Something that basically everybody's been saying about them is that they are basically like giant live-action anime, which is something I can't necessarily comment on because the only anime I've ever seen is Thomas the Tank Engine, Cory in the House, and Napoleon Dynamite, which is just a fancy way of saying I was really glad to see these fight sequences in a large format like IMAX, which is of course where the IMAX really comes to play. The incredible detail and immersive sound system really makes you feel like you're right in the ring with these two, something of which I would never want to do in real life because they would destroy me. If you were to re-release any of the Rocky movies in IMAX like tomorrow, of course those movies would all look really good in IMAX, all scaled up and what have you, but when a movie is specially crafted for the IMAX format, like Creed 3 was, it really shows and it takes advantage of the format beautifully, making these fights feel so larger than life and like you just can't escape the tension between these two, and got to come home with a free poster, which is pretty cool because I like getting free posters even though I have nowhere to put this damn thing. Overall, Creed 3 delivers another excellent entry in the Rocky franchise with an equally as excellent directorial debut of Michael B. Jordan. I don't honestly know how many more times they can make these movies and still keep them fresh, but one thing's for sure, I'm always gonna look forward to one of these movies coming around. And as for the IMAX itself, again it being the first sports movie ever filmed for IMAX, I would say that yes, the IMAX is certainly worth it for those wonderfully shot fight sequences. If you want to see another IMAX review from me, I got just the thing right over here. Otherwise, we'll see you on the Brockopp side.